Hebrews 11:30 tonight. Hebrews 11:30. We just finished the faith that was demonstrated in the life of Moses. We were looking at the faith of his parents, Amram and Jochebed. In verse 23, they had faith to hide their son, to defy an unbiblical, ungodly order. We saw the faith of Moses to choose to identify with Israel instead of Egypt in verse 24 through verse 26. His faith, once again, to lead in the Passover and the Exodus from Egypt in verse 27 and 28. And then the faith of Moses that he was able to inspire also. He inspired faith in the Hebrews, because the Bible says in verse 29, by faith they crossed the Red Sea. And though they were not marked by a tremendous amount of faith, they were able to borrow a little bit of Moses and go out across the Red Sea. So now we come to the last specific entries in the Hall of Faith. So there's a little bit more. We're going to look at verse 30 and verse 31 this evening. But this is the last of the specifics. That we're going to get one more name, and that's the name of Rahab. And then we have a little bit more of her story. Next time we look at Hebrews 11, we'll look at, there's a list of names, but there's nothing said about them. So this is the last kind of specific entry. But we start off, before we get to Rahab, we have the faith that was found at Jericho in verse 30. It says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. So keep your finger here and flip back to Joshua, because both of these accounts are in Joshua. So we'll look at the story. Joshua chapter 6 is where we go to find the account of what happened in Jericho, specifically when the walls came tumbling down, as we sing. In verse number 1 of Joshua 6, we read, now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said unto Joshua, see, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor. And ye shall compass the city, all ye men of war, and go round about the city once. Thus shalt thou do 6 days. And 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns. And the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times. And the priests shall blow with the trumpets, and it shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when ye hear the sound of the trumpet, all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and people shall ascend every man straight before him. Okay, so you know the story of Joshua. We even sing the song about how Joshua fought the battle of Jericho. This is an unusual battle plan. Would you at least give that? This is not normal. This is not how you would typically go at a defense city. Total, they'll walk around it 13 times. 6 times, once a day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they'll walk around 7 times. Now, when we talk about the walls in this day, we think of walls as we heard a lot during the last administration about building the wall, right? And we saw this wall that went across a little bit of an area. Totally, totally different. In this day, the walls of cities similar to Jericho were much, much thicker. So thick, in fact, that 2 chariots could pass each other going around the top of the walls. Okay, the walls were tremendously thick. They were some of them were very high. Often they had battlements on them. And so this is kind of what they're up against. The wall was wide enough that often people would live in the wall or on the wall. They could build their house on the wall so that their entire house was part of the battlements of the city. Jericho is the first city that the children of Israel faced after they crossed the Jordan River. One of these days, maybe we'll go and we'll look at what happened in Joshua. It's pretty interesting. They crossed the river, the Jordan River. Remember, on dry land, they came across the river. And the first thing they did is they encamped. They encamped at Gilgal, and Joshua circumcised all the men in enemy territory. That is an act of faith, that you would do that, because he kind of put all of his warriors at a disadvantage there for a little bit. They got into enemy territory and did that, and then they decided it's time we're going to go up against Jericho. And he had this battle plan that was given to him right here by God himself. So it's the first city that they come up against. And as you read through the book of Joshua, there are going to be many cities that were taken in standard battle. God didn't do this with all the cities. The next city didn't go like this. This is the only city that they marched around and the walls fell down. And you'd think it would be foolish to try unless you had God's word that this is how it was going to happen, right? If you just went and started walking around a city, that'd be a little bit on the kooky side, and that's exactly what it would have been. But remember, Hebrews 11:1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. And I would make the case that by establishing this precedent, that God was preparing the people for the battles that lie ahead. You see, Jericho, while it was the first, it was an exceptionally well-defended city. By that day's standards, impregnable. Nobody can take it. Certainly not a ragtag bunch of Jews who've been wandering around the wilderness for 400 years while everybody 20 and older drops dead. Okay, that's certainly not the type of people who could take on Jericho, but that's what God did. And I think God did it specifically. He had them do it this way with Jericho because it was the first city. So God knocked down the walls of one of the biggest, one of the baddest enemies that they would face. And the people were going to be facing other walled cities and other kings and other confederations of kings. About halfway through the book of Joshua, what ends up happening is they quit fighting against individual kings and cities because the kings all confederated themselves. So all of the kings of the north came down against Joshua. Then all of the kings of the south came up against Joshua. And so they were fighting multiple people groups and large armies. But they would be able to look back at Jericho and say something to the effect of, if God can bring down the walls of Jericho without us doing anything, because do you think their marching is what knocked the walls down? I watched a video back when I was a teenager. Somebody was trying to explain away the miracles. And they literally said that it was the marching of the people and it loosened the... No, that's ridiculous. If that was the case, then somebody could have just walked up and pushed the wall over. No, it was all about God. And they could look back when they had to face another walled city or another large army, and they could say, look, if God can do what he did at Jericho, then I think God can deliver these people into our hands as well. This is why we read in James 1 verse 2, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. And we say, how on earth is that possible? How can I rejoice when I fall into trouble? Well, he says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. It should come as an extreme encouragement to you and to me, and it does, that the trials and troubles that we face can be used of God to build our faith for when we are going to face similar trials, similar troubles in the future. Or when we're going to be able to come alongside somebody else who's facing similar trials and say, hey, let me tell you what God did. It's interesting that God took the children of Israel through the Red Sea on dry land, isn't it? You would think that that would be kind of a watershed moment, no pun intended, for them. And they would say, boy, if God can divide the Red Sea, what can't he do? When they got hungry, what should they have done? They should have said, well, we serve the God who can divide the waters. And then God rained down food on them. And you see where I'm going here? All of the things that happened to them, all of the different trials, temptations, and troubles that they faced should have been operating as building blocks of their faith so that they would be able to say, look, I don't know exactly how God is going to do this, but let me tell you what God's done for me in the past. When they went up against Ai, they should have, now we know the story because they went up and Achan had sinned, but when they went up the second time, they said, look, God's able to do this. And God did. And then they went up against multiple other cities, and God delivered them into their hands. So the faith that we see here, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. Not just the faith that made that happen, which they had, which would have been Joshua's faith, but also the faith that they had as they went about the next campaigns, the next things that they had to face. I would make the case that God was using what happened at Jericho to increase their faith. And God does the same thing for us. Now, let's look at Rahab's faith, because this is pretty interesting stuff in verse 31. By faith, keep your finger in Joshua, because we're going to be going back there in just a second. By faith, the harlot Rahab. Significant that God would put that modifier in there? He could have just said Rahab, and he did in other places in the Bible. But in this case, he says, by faith, the harlot Rahab. Again, that's not by mistake. God includes that. Perish not with them that believe not, when she had received the spies with peace. God doesn't gloss over the sins of her past. She was a harlot. She was a woman of ill repute, according to Scripture, but the blessings that became hers through faith are mind-blowing, truly mind-blowing, because it goes much further than just what we read about in Joshua. But her story is found in Joshua chapter 2. You can turn there. Joshua, back up here a little bit, okay, because we were just talking about Jericho. Back up, okay, and put all of the children of Israel back on the other side of the Jordan. They're on the west side of the Jordan River, or on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, and so they're over on the east side. They're getting ready to go into the land to check out and to conquer the land. But Joshua sent 2 spies into the land of Canaan before everyone else was set to cross. Where do you figure Joshua got the ideas to send spies into Canaan? From Moses. Moses did it famously from Kadesh Barnea. He sent 12 men. Maybe you remember the song, 12 men went to spy on Canaan. 10 were bad and 2 were good, right? So we had the 12 who went. The 2 who were good were Caleb and Joshua. And they had gone and they had come back with an evil report. But this time it's Joshua. And he just sends 2, okay? So maybe he figures, we only got 2 good ones last time. We'll just start with 2 this time. So he sends 2 in. They came to Jericho, and they went into the city, and they came to the house of Rahab, which I always wondered, what on earth were 2 Hebrew men doing at the house of a harlot? Well, in that day, it was common for the harlots of that day to own more of the inns, the houses where people would come and they would sleep. So that I'm going to give these guys the benefit of the doubt here and say they weren't up to no good while they were here. But they go to Rahab's house. And not long after they arrive, the soldiers of Jericho come, and they're searching for these 2 Israelite men. They say they've come to spy out the land, and we want them, and we're going to do away with them, very likely. So Rahab took these 2 men up to her roof, and she hid them under some flax that she had drying up there, and she sent the soldiers of Jericho on a wild goose chase. She said, they left, and if you hurry, you might can catch them before the gate closes. Now, as we've dealt with in 1 Samuel, she lied. Okay? God doesn't need her lie, but again, it's recorded in Scripture for us. Verse 8 of Joshua chapter 2 says, and before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, these are the 2 Hebrew spies, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites, that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Now, hold this thought, because there's something really, really interesting that I want to point out to you here. How did Rahab describe the morale of the Canaanites in relation to the Hebrews? She describes how the Hebrews made them feel. You see it? You see what she said? She said, all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Verse 11, she says, and as soon as we heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man. Now, if you back up to Numbers 13, when Moses sent in the spies, and the 10 men came back, the 10 who were bad, they gave an evil report. See if you can notice a difference here between what Rahab said, this is how it is, and what the 10 men, the 10 spies came back and said. In Numbers 13, verse 31, we read, "But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." Do you hear any difference between what Rahab said, this is how it is, and how these 10 men without faith described it? They said, oh, they look at us like grasshoppers. Rahab said, when we heard about what God did at the Red Sea and what God did to the kings of the Amorites, our hearts melted. We're in bad shape. It's interesting how the eyes of faith changed that, isn't it? How these 10 men who had gone in, they were looking through the eyes of flesh. Where Caleb and Joshua said, hey, let's go up. We're well able to take it. God can give us this land. But the eyes of faithlessness, they were saying, oh, we can't do it. But they could God have given them the land of Israel, the promised land, if they would have gone in faith? Could God have given it to them? Yeah, he could have. Faith, a lack of faith will lose much. But Rahab, back here to Joshua 2 and to Hebrews 11, Rahab helped the 2 spies escape. You remember this? She let them down. She lived in a house that was part of the wall. It was on the wall. And so she let these 2 spies out. She let out a scarlet rope. And she let them out, and they got down on the other side and went and hid themselves in the mountains for a few days. But before they left, Rahab said to them in verse 12 of Joshua 2, "Now therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye also will show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, that ye will save alive my father, my mother, my brethren, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death." And the man answered her, "Our lives for yours. If ye utter not this our business, and it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee." So these men agree with her. Look, we will save you, we'll save your family, anybody who's in your house when we come. But they told her that the way she was to mark herself was to tie that same scarlet rope in her window and let it down as a marker. Now, can you think of any reason why a woman under suspicion of consorting with spies would be looked at with suspicion for a rope hanging out of her window when that army crossed over the Jordan? I can. They would look at her, they'd say, she did help them escape. It would have taken a certain amount of faith for her to do this. For her to tie a red rope and toss it out her window as a marker would have taken a certain amount of faith. For her to say, you know what? I'm going to trust the God of the Hebrews, because she wasn't a Hebrew. I trust the God of the Hebrews, and I trust the word of these men that they will save me. So Joshua came to Jericho, as we already read. They went about their unusual battle plan that depended entirely upon the invisible hand of God. They blew the trumpets after 7 times on the 7th day, and the walls fell down. Joshua 6 verse 22 tells us, "But Joshua had said unto the 2 men that had spied out the country, Go unto the harlot's house." Interesting that that's how Joshua identified her as well, isn't it? That God's not glossing over this at all. "Bring out thence the woman, and all that she hath, as ye swear unto her." And the young men that were spies went in and brought out Rahab, and her father, and her mother, and her brethren, and all that she had. And they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold, and the vessels of brass and of iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had, and she dwelled in Israel even unto this day, the day in which this was written, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. It took a lot of faith for her to do what she did. Enough faith that she made the Hall of Fame of Faith in Hebrews 11. Not even a Jew Not a Jewish woman by birth. She was, we'll see in just a moment, she was incorporated into the Jewish line, but when she did her courageous, faith-filled act, she wasn't even a Jew. While the rest of the inhabitants of Jericho looked at God and his chosen people with fear, Rahab looked with faith. And the same faith in the power of God that brought down the walls of Jericho kept Rahab's portion of the wall standing. Because remember, she lived on the wall. And the walls of Jericho fell down, so that portion of the wall was left. But Rahab's faith was further rewarded. You see, she would marry into the children of Israel. She would marry Salmon, who was a prince of the tribe of Judah. You read about him in Matthew chapter 3. Salmon was kind of interesting. Salmon married Rahab, and they together gave birth to Boaz. You remember who Boaz married? Ruth. And you remember who Ruth gave birth to, or who was in that genealogy? We just looked at it Sunday evening. You have from Rahab, you have Boaz and Ruth, who were the great-grandparents of David, who was in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. So Rahab's faith not only saved her life and her family, but it also made it so that she could be included into the genealogy of the Messiah. What was she again? A harlot. And the Bible doesn't pull any punches on that. Almost all the times you read about her, she was a harlot. And yet she's in the line of Christ. Because of what? Well, because of what we read about here in Hebrews 11:31. Because of her faith. And what was her faith? How was her faith demonstrated? What was the evidence of an invisible faith? Well, she delivered the spies, and then she tossed a rope out her window, incriminating herself, and yet God saved her. God saved her in more ways than one. So by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down, verse 30, and built the muscles of faith that would see the entire promised land come into the hands of the Jews. I saw, when somebody was having a hard time saying, I don't know if God can give us the victory in this battle, somebody could say, hey, you remember Jericho? You remember what we did at Jericho? Yeah, we walked around in a circle 13 times, and God knocked the city over. Okay? So you can trust God now. So their faith brought the walls down and also increased their faith for what came next. And by faith, God rescued a harlot from death, saved her soul, and made her one in a long line of grace and faith in the family tree of when God chose to send his son, he sent his son through the line of Rahab. That's pretty significant. And a harlot, a Canaanite, and yet God, in his mercy, did so much for her. Any thoughts that you have tonight from Hebrews 11:30 and 31?
I'm just reading here about Joshua. He was the son of Nun, Moses' minister. Is that talking about minister as being something other than
His servant.
just a servant?
He was close to Moses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody said Joshua didn't have any parents because he was the son of Nun, but obviously different spellings. N-U-N.
So had he been a young man
Joshua?
when he took over this? Yeah, when he was.
No, he'd have been probably just ballparking. He would have been well over 40, probably in his 60s by the time he would have come into control. He was one of two men who would follow when the children of Israel were condemned to wander and everybody above 20 died. Joshua was above 20, so he was at least 60 when he took over control from Moses. When Moses died, Joshua was the next leader of Israel, and he's the one who led them across the Jordan.
Right.
But at least 60, because he was over 20, and then 40 years of wandering while everybody else died. And
That's
then
recorded that he was. There was two people. That were,
Caleb and Joshua, because they were the two spies, the only two who had faith.
The only two that said that they were going to take the land.
Yeah.
I understand that.
If
I don't mean they could have been 10 or.
If
100,
Caleb,
you know.
if Caleb and Joshua were close to the same age, then when they went into the land for the conquest of Canaan that we read about in Joshua, then Joshua would have been, I think, 80, because Caleb was.
What if they went through the Red Sea?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
That's what he was written
yeah.
about. Any of the original people, right? That had to be.
The people who died, they died as a result of the faithlessness of the 10 spies who came back.
I'm talking about they all died at a certain age.
20 years in.
Weren't these all the original people that had no faith? I mean, they was complaining about everything.
Yes, yeah, that would have. Most of them. There would have been children. Those children. How it worked out was when God gave the curse to those people in Numbers. He said, "You were all whining that you would lose your children if you went into the land of Israel, into the land of promise, the land of Canaan. So I'm going to have you wander around till you all die, and then your children will go in and actually do it." So
they put that. How they put that? Is it a generation, or how did they?
I don't remember exactly the wording off the top of my head.
Right. I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
Is it like a 3-week walk from Egypt where they were to the promised land?
Oh yeah. It's actually about a 5-day walk.
5-day walk.
Yeah, it's with a line of Hebrews. If they were 20 across and had 6 feet between them, the Jews, if they would have just gone straight by the shortest route, the Jews would have been arriving in Canaan before the last people even left Egypt. It's that close.
I understand that, but I'm just talking about.
Well, like it's
like
crazy because it seems like they're just traipsing just over a hill and country.
That's why people, when people get lost, they go in a circle.
Yeah.
And that's because it's what they did in the desert.
Yeah.
That's why it's biblical.
Yeah.
People will go in a circle.
They really did.
You laugh about that.
They
but
wander.
that's-
Yeah.
The best part is, though, I wonder, of course, we only got 2 ladies here, but just think those ladies better like the clothes they were wearing because their clothes didn't wear out for 40 years.
Yeah. No clothes, no shoe shopping. It would be rough.
Maybe I just wore the same dress.
Yeah, it'd be a pretty rough time. I remember doing the math on it. If you had 4 million Jews, and when they started dropping after the curse to wander, they would have been burying, like, I don't remember, I want to say they were performing 12 funerals a day. Every day for 40 years. Could you imagine? You'd never get past it. It would always be, and because you're 12 tribes, you're 12 families, but you're all close families. So it's not that, well, so-and-so died, but I've never heard. No, you'd have some connection to them. You've got cousins, 12 a day, who are dropping. Why? Because of faithlessness. So God takes faith extremely seriously. He says here, without faith it's impossible to please Him. But to me, the most amazing thing is what faith overcomes. Faith overcame a Canaanite harlot and allowed her to be part of the line of Christ. That's mind-blowing. The mercy of God that is accessed by faith is tremendous.